Today's Middle East is in turmoil, with major political forces competing for power and legitimacy. I'm your host, Mark Brzezinski, and I've been fortunate to have had the opportunity to visit the Middle East region extensively on over 150 trips since my student days. I've edited a couple of books about the region, one published by Congressional Quarterly, another by the Smithsonian's Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars, and also helped the National Geographic Society produce a film strip series about the region. And most recently, my commentaries have been featured in a new multimedia CD book, which has extensive information about the history as well as the contemporary situation in today's Middle East. The client regimes in the region, especially in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Jordan, and Egypt, in recent years have been threatened by the rise of Arab and Islamic nationalism as never before. These are all unpopular, repressive, and grossly undemocratic regimes, either imposed or controlled by the West. At the same time, the Palestine national movement that had brought about the historic Intifada had become exhausted, and the Palestine Liberation Organization, long headed by Yasser Arafat, had bankrupted itself both financially and politically. In this overall context, and in the aftermath of the 1991 Gulf War that destroyed Iraqi power, the Israelis and the Americans saw a major historic opportunity to reconfigure the Middle East region to their benefit. The Madrid conference, convened later that same year, announced that such an attempt was vigorously underway. It is all very seductively termed the peace process in the Western press, but actually it's a continuation of an ongoing domination process, first brought to the region by the European powers after World War I at the time of the Ottoman Empire's collapse. This domination process was then greatly expanded because of the growing importance of the region's black gold, petroleum, and it was then still further expanded because of the creation of the non-Arab state of Israel in 1948. In the aftermath of Madrid, after a few years of fruitless public negotiations, a faction of the defeated and demoralized PLO secretly agreed to Israeli terms. Within days, a former ostracized terrorist was all of a sudden summoned to the White House with much fanfare. It was, in essence, a camouflaged surrender, extravagantly manipulated for worldwide television. Consequently, even the head of the Palestine negotiating team refused to attend the White House signing ceremony. In the past few years, Yasser Arafat has accepted the sponsorship and financing, and thus, of course, the control of his former enemies. It's a modern-day repetition of how client regimes have been established by the West in the Middle East region throughout this century. Professor Edward Said, one of the most distinguished Palestinian commentators, has in fact publicly called Arafat a collaborator and likened his Palestine Authority to the Nazi-created Vichy regime in occupied France during World War II. Because of the great historical and political importance of the events now taking place in the area of the Holy Land, this series of programs about Palestine today is being featured by Mideast Realities. The mostly Palestinian personalities you will be meeting during this series in the coming weeks will help you understand the complexities of the historical developments taking place in our lifetime, developments which many believe bear the seeds of much future regional conflict yet to come. For the past few years, Yasser Arafat has been creating a caricature of the many police states that dominate the region. Arafat was assigned this role because someone was needed whose image would be credible for world public opinion and for at least some segments of the Palestine population. And Israel had already tried and failed with all the other choices. The half-dozen or more competing security forces Arafat has established, with American and Israeli support, have been assigned the task of bringing the far more popular Palestinian nationalist forces under control. In short, the once independent PLO was first destroyed, and then it was resurrected in co-opted fashion. What we see happening before our eyes is a classic example of the divide-and-rule approach first introduced by the British and the French to the region before the modern era of American-Israeli domination. Consequently, rather than the self-determination and independence they have for so long struggled for. The Palestinian people today find themselves being reduced to existence on modern-day reservations. Some say Bantustans is a better analogy, while the majority of their land and resources continue to be taken from them. All opposition is branded simplistically as terrorism, and all who oppose this unenviable destiny are quite literally being beaten into submission. To understand why the various groups are acting as they are, it is important to appreciate that the client regimes in the region, now including the Arafat regime, are cooperating with the Americans and the Israelis in what is essentially a desperate attempt to prevent their own nationalist and populist forces from taking power. Just as in the past, this divide and rule approach to controlling the wealth and geography of the Middle East is very much in play today, and no doubt will be written about in such terms in future history books. From Morocco and Algeria in the west to Iran and Pakistan in the east, with the oil and petrodollar-rich Gulf in the geographic center, the basic struggle in the contemporary Middle East is between imposed repressive regimes protected by the U.S. and now Israel, these on one side, and populist, nationalist, and Islamic forces attempting to wrest control from those who oppress them on the other side. In a region where nearly all established authority is unpopular and illegitimate, the seeds of further chaos and revolution, as has already occurred in Iran, Lebanon, Algeria, and the Sudan, are today being sown. In addition, as the well-known Egyptian political analyst Mohammed Sid-Ahmed explained in previous MER programs when I interviewed him in Cairo, the Middle East region is today in the midst of a major arms race. We are, in fact, in the opening rounds of a nuclear and biological arms race, whose ramifications could well be catastrophic at some future date. The U.S. and Israel are frantically trying to prevent those opposing the current Pax Americana order in the region from achieving their goals. But in reality, it was the Israelis who in the first place introduced nuclear weapons into the region almost a generation ago, with clandestine American help, and they have at least twice threatened to actually use them. In this Palestine Today series of programs, a number of professors and Middle East experts discuss all of these realities far more openly and honestly than American audiences are usually exposed to. Even so, much of what is being said remains a bit between the lines. In many cases, it has become second nature for Middle Easterners to pull their punches, fearing retribution that comes in various forms. In other cases, including some of the Palestinian intellectuals you're about to hear, they are not totally independent and authentic voices. For however articulate and interesting, these people are carefully selected, have establishment connections and often foreign university degrees, speak English well, and are free to travel to attend conferences such as the recent one at Georgetown University, where some of these persons presented their views. Other persons back home, and uninvited, would present the situation in far more stark and far more ominous terms. Thank you for watching Mideast Realities, and we hope you will tune in regularly. At the end of this half-hour program, I'll tell you how to easily get in touch with your comments and ideas, and how to get additional information about our program and the groups who make it possible, including the new Committee on the Middle East.
Is the Palestine National Authority. The Palestine National Authority, according to the Oslo Agreement, was to be constituted by general elections in July 1994. As we all know, these elections did not take place. And the PNA is today still what Mr. Arafat hastily put together last year, a non-representative, ramshackle structure, answerable solely to him. The first, and so far the main achievement of the PNA has been to establish a police and security system in Gaza and Jericho along the lines of the Mukhabarat state, familiar in most Arab regimes. Little, if any, progress has been achieved in any other field. People at the beginning were willing to put up with the confusion that followed Mr. Arafat's arrival in Gaza. And they were willing to wait until Mr. Arafat would build his administration and prepare the grounds for elections. But it soon became clear that Mr. Arafat was not really interested in administration or in elections, but primarily in consolidating his own power. He brought in his followers and systematically excluded available Palestinian talent. The result was the creation of mirror image structures of the PLO and a state of chaos reminiscent of Beirut and Tunis. Most Palestinians today see no other way out of the present impasse except holding elections as soon as possible to elect a Palestinian National Assembly empowered with the establishment of a legal national authority for the Palestinians. Last week, during Mr. Christopher's visit to the Middle East, the Arabian government declared in what Foreign Minister Perez termed a breakthrough in the talks with Arafat, declared a definite date, July 1, for holding the elections. But Prime Minister Rabin dampened the announcement by stating that the only obstacle to moving ahead was what he called Palestinian terrorism, adding, quote, therefore, aiming at the target date of the elections is a test to both sides, unquote. How should we read these words? Simply that holding the elections next July will be contingent on Mr. Arafat suppressing the Islamic opposition movement in Gaza and the West Bank. In other words, Mr. Rabin literally wants Mr. Arafat to replicate in Palestine the status and role of General Lahad in South Lebanon. He obviously intends to use the elections to push Mr. Arafat into acting forcefully against the Islamic opposition. And it is no secret that neither he nor Mr. Arafat are very keen about free and democratic elections, especially internationally supervised elections. It is not surprising, therefore, if what is promised in this breakthrough does not sound very exciting to most Palestinians. For most Palestinians, the alternative course of action, if elections fail, that is, if elections are manipulated or again put off is to support the Islamic opposition, to resist both Mr. Arafat's dictatorship and Israeli occupation, which will probably trigger a new intifada. Here I would like to say a word about the Palestinian Islamic resistance movement and its possible role if elections were not properly carried out. From the very beginning, Israel all equated resistance with terrorism. Any Palestinian who resisted Israeli occupation was portrayed as a terrorist. This image has now shifted from the PLO to the Islamic opposition. Contrary to the stereotype presented by the Israeli and American media, the Islamic resistance movement is composed not of bearded religious fanatics, nor necessarily of devout or even practicing Muslims, but of militants of the Intifada, now come of age, and of former members of the secular organizations who have given up on the PLO and its leadership. Islam represents to these groups and individuals a rich religious and cultural heritage which unites them in a struggle in which they see their very survival as a people being threatened. Does Mr. Rabin think that Israeli security can be achieved by Mr. Arafat crushing this movement? What would it take to make the citizens of the only nuclear power in the region feel secure riding a bus in Tel Aviv, or doing guard duty in the West Bank, or driving on a highway in the Palestinian countryside? Is security to be equated only with total power and domination, or are there other imperatives that could provide the ground for genuine security? The Israelis will have the kind of security they seek only when they realize that such security cannot be had by suppressing the Palestinian people or by dominating the Arab world. In the end, they can do neither, but by a historic reconciliation with their Palestinian and Arab neighbors, a reconciliation based not on power and domination, but on workable justice and on mutual recognition. Many Palestinians, a little over a year ago, were willing to support the peace process despite their opposition to the Oslo Agreement, precisely because they thought that the Israeli leadership had taken such a historic decision to recognize the Palestinians as a people and to accept the partition of Palestine as the basis of a final settlement. But as it turned out, we were tragically mistaken. It was not reconciliation that the Israeli leadership had in mind, but separation at the tide. And sadly, a majority of Israelis, according to the recent polls, support this racist policy, which took the world half a century to dismantle in South Africa. We are very fortunate today to have with us a group of distinguished Palestinian professionals who will address some of the issues I have touched upon, particularly those dealing with the conditions of peace and the Palestine National Authority. Muna Rishmawi, Aoun Ashawa, Ali Jarbawi, and Iyad Sarraj will each cover an aspect of the situation and give us their assessment of it. Unfortunately, Mr. Sten Anderson, who was to be our luncheon speaker, is unable to be with us today. Dr. Haider Abdeshafi, the head of the Palestinian delegation to the Washington Peace Talks and our keynote speaker, will deliver his address at the luncheon meeting. So we will have additional time this morning for questions and discussion ending at 12:15. And now it is my pleasure to turn over the meeting to Helena Cobban, who is known to most of you and who is the author of what is, to my mind, one of the best books on the Palestinians. Helena.
Thank you, Dr. Sharabi. I was very honored to be invited to head this, not to head this panel, but to chair it. We have a wonderful group of people speaking today, and I had a short discussion with some of them regarding the time that they can speak, and I think we all agreed, or I will now say that we agreed, that one of the particular values, and certainly in my mind this is true, of the Center for Policy Analysis on Palestine has always been that it's a place where Palestinians and others can gather to discuss even matters that are difficult to discuss in public in ways that are constructive and really get at the heart of things. So we're going to try to leave some time after the presentations for this kind of a discussion here. And so I will just ask the presenters to keep their remarks focused on something that will really provoke a helpful discussion for us all and to keep them as short as they can. But really they have a lot of wonderful things to tell us about. I know that coming from the occupied territories or from the so-called autonomous zone, they can really share their experiences in a useful way with us. The first speaker is Muna Rishmawi, and I'm actually delighted that I never met Muna before, so I'm delighted to meet her here now. Contrary to what it says on your piece of paper, she has not been practicing law since 1958. 85 was when she started. Ms. Rishmawi holds a Master of Law degree from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Law degree from Ain Shams University in Cairo. She acted as a member of the Executive Committee of Al-Haq until 1989, and then from 1989 to 1990 she was Executive Director of Al-Haq at the time that that organization became a recipient of the Carter Menial Human Rights Award. During this period with Al-Haq, she authored or edited several publications. She's a member of the International Advisory Committee for the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Award. She is the author and editor of several publications on women's rights, human rights, and the independence of the judiciary.
Thank you very much, Helena. I'm very pleased and happy to be here. The last time I was here to address an American audience was actually in 1989, and I'm very happy to be back to the United States and see a lot of my friends here, Nufar, Jane, and many others. And I'm pleased for the opportunity to talk today. Okay, what I would like to discuss with you today is the legal framework of the actions of the Palestinian Authority. Clearly, the legal framework of the actions of the Palestinian Authority derives from both the declarations.
Louder, please.
Sorry?
Louder.
Louder.
Close to the mic.
Close to the mic.